Okay, I want to welcome everybody today. I'm Janie Lantz, and I have Amy on the other end here who is doing all our technical support. And if you joined us today for the topic of how to digitize logos, you are in the right place. We are doing today in the Windows side, and we will be doing next week showing it with the Mac tools. So if you're a Mac user or you kind of swing back and forth between Mac and Windows, be sure you hit both of these or the one that's appropriate for the operating system you use. So I do want to mention that the internet is kind of strange today, and Amy says we've been freezing up a little bit here while we were getting ready. So if you see it glitching in and out, don't get too concerned. It shouldn't be for more than a second or so at a time. And you may not notice it at all if you're watching the live directly. And also, I want to remind you not to click on outside links. As always, the outside links can be from people who are trying to spam you, and we don't want anybody to get spammed. So our Facebook Lives are always free, and feel free to post questions as well. Amy's going to keep an eye on those. And as we start going through the lesson today, she will either let me know there's questions or I'll stop and ask periodically. So my topic, digitizing a logo. And I think in all the years that I've taught embroidery software, and I've been doing this a long time, since like the mid 1990s, and the question I've gotten the most often is, how do I digitize the logo? There's always an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a sister, a brother-in-law, somebody somewhere who needs a logo digitized. And digitizing logos is not what I would call like cooking instant oatmeal. You don't just put it in a bowl and cook it and it's ready to use. Digitizing a logo takes a little bit of planning, a little bit of care. So what makes a really great looking logo? And a friend needed this logo, so I digitized it for her. This is actually her family's embroidery or a badge that she had for a family member for their farm. And a good logo, a well digitized logo, is going to be crisp and clear and very readable. I know it's reversed on the camera, but it should have lettering that is clear, and you should be able to tell what the details represent. But as we start going through this and start talking about tips and things, what I want to point out to you is that logos don't always use all the details from an image. So if you look at the image, you can see there's lots of little in the section with the animals, there's lots of little things that looks like flowers and grass with heads on it, like maybe wheat or grain. When you start actually reproducing the logo, you're not going to use all that detail because too much detail. First of all, you can't digitize the stitches small enough. You can't build that kind of detail into things. So let's look at what we can do to create logos. And the first thing people try is they open either embroidery or the digitizing software. Thank you, Amy. You're really good. And we use Express Design. So in the Express Design window, all I have to do is load a picture. And I'm going to use this Fates Farm image. Now, when the image was sent to me, and I doubt very much that you can see this well, but when this was sent to me, it was sent as a PDF file. So it was a picture that had been pasted into Word and saved as a PDF. And it was not suitable. Our software can't open those. But all I did was a screen capture and save that as a PNG type image, or you could use a JPEG or a bitmap, whatever you can save to. And then we open it up and we're going to run it through Express Design. And this looks like it would be really successful because it's a nice, crisp image. Everything is well defined here. I'm going to just run this through the wizard. It's cropping nicely automatically. So I am going to choose to enter a design size, and I want to make this 3 inches across because that's what she asked for. So I'm going to type in on my size 3 inches, and then I'm going to say next. And the nice thing is the wizard's going to size this for me automatically. I didn't do a lot of filtering. I just want to see what this looks like from Express Design. So I'm going to click next again. And it does take a little while for it to process because there is a lot of the animals are kind of cartoony, but there's actually a ton of detail here. And I can see already when I click finish, I'm missing a lot of bits and pieces because the software could only take what it saw and make this at a very small size and then try and reproduce the detail it could. It's not bad. I mean, actually, for an Express Design, it's not bad, but it's not what I would want to stitch on someone's shirt as a logo. So let's look at what we would do to create a really great digitized logo. First thing I would want to do is use manual punch. So I'm going to go up here and actually I'm going to close this out because we're having internet slowdown and I don't want to have more windows open than I really need in case that would cause worse slowdown. So the first thing we want to do is I'm just going to cancel out Express Design because we have tools here that are quick create tools, freehand create tools, which is where you draw the outline for a shape or a line for stitches like you're drawing with a pencil. And we have point create. And my choice for doing logos is always going to be point create because point create gives me the option to be able to select the exact kind of stitches I want. I can add applique if I need to. I can tell it to create an area or line, and I can click my points. So how much detail do I need for the embroidery that I want to design? And I'm going to go back here and go to mySewnet, and I've staged here some designs, and you can see this one is actually a logo that I digitized for the company at one point in time. This one is very teeny tiny, but I'm going to open it up just so you can see it. So give it a second here. It'll open in the digitizing window. And this particular one, do you see how this is a Chicago skyline and there was a Ferris wheel and there was an event center next to this convention center, and they wanted the date. If I go into the view and hide that background image, they wanted it done like a badge. So I did this like as applique would be done so that they could do the tack down stitches and then put their fabric down and then stitch the rest of the logo. But when you're starting to design things like this, and this one is a really good example, this is simply a pattern fill in a rectangle, but then I chose a pattern that formed columns in the pattern itself. And it looks like a building with windows and brick and blocks. This is simply rings of triple stitch and then little circles, and it's made to look like the buckets that you sit in when you're riding on a Ferris wheel. So all of these things, when you're designing and then you're looking at that artwork that's back behind, this artwork that's back behind, if I go to the Edit tab and hide pretty much everything except the first color change and the tack down stitch, you can see the artwork really is very complicated and not very complete. That's what I was sent to use, so that's what I had to play with. Now, what I want to look at is the second piece of embroidery that I have done. And that one is let's see, this one right here. Questions, comments, Amy?
No questions yet.
Okay. So this one is really kind of cool because when I started playing with it, when you start designing a logo, you need to look at the level of detail. What do I want to include and what do I want to create with illusion? You're going to trick the eye. You're going to mislead the eye into seeing the things that you want to see. So if you look at this up close, the background image is grass. And so I simply used a feathered satin stitch, and I made it flat on one side and rough on the other, and turned it at a little bit of an angle when I place those points. And that leads the eye to think that it's grass. So as we work down through this, I'm going to actually show you a little bit of how I digitize this. But the thing I want you to remember is when you're going to digitize a logo, the most common mistake that beginners make is they try and put in too much detail. The machine then can't stitch it, and it just looks cluttery and cloggy and kind of like that thing we sent through the Express Design Wizard, which is not a nice, clear, concise logo. So I'm going to come back and open a new window. And the first thing you need to do when you're working with creating a logo design is to get your artwork in there. And most of the time, if I'm digitizing a logo, so things to think about. Are you doing this for hire? Are you doing this for yourself? Is this going to be a production run piece, which means is somebody going to take this design and stitch it 5,000 times on shirts? Because all of those things affect your choices when you're digitizing. Are they only going to ever stitch this at 3 inches big? Or are they going to want to be able to select this, adjust the size of the embroidery design so they can stitch it 3 inches on the front of a shirt and 12 inches on the back? Because when you take a design digitized for 3 inches and you scale it much larger, it is going to affect the quality of the stitches, and it's also going to change how much detail you need to work into the finished design. So I'm going to go through and bring in a background image and size it so you can kind of see how this works. And to do that, I need to go in Windows to the View tab and select Edit Background. Now, when I select Edit Background, that's going to link me to Draw and Paint. And when I get into the Draw and Paint program, I have an Insert tab. And in the Insert tab, I can select to insert a file, and that's where I want to go if I have artwork and I want to take this artwork and embed it as a background for manually digitizing. It's called manual punch or whatever you want to call it. And I'm just going to use this. It's a paint image. It's pixels. It's a PNG file. It is not a vector image, which would have lines and fills. It is pixelated artwork. I'm going to select it and open it, and it's going to come into the background area, and it's box selected. But I want to crop away some of this white background area, so I can click outside of this, and then I can use my box selecting tool, and I can click and drag a box and just include the part of the image that I want to use. And I'm looking at the edges of this crop box. And when I release it, you can see that it's now cropped it down so that I've gotten rid of some of that excess white at the top and the bottom and one of the sides. There is a tool in the design panel called Canvas. And when I click the Canvas tool, that has crop to selection. So that crops away anything I had excluded outside the select box. Now, what I need to do is size this. So I am going to hold down actually, I'm going to go to the View tab. And in the View tab, I can set up things about the canvas work area in Draw and Paint. In embroidery or in digitizing, we call this just the work area. In Draw and Paint, they call it the canvas. And you can set to show or hide a grid. You can set where the grid starts, center or top left corner. I use center because I like to have the image centered, and then I like to hold a pair of keyboard keys and just size it from the center locked proportionally, and my grid size. And I'm going to make the grid size roughly 1 inch, which is roughly 25 millimeters. And then I'm going to take each one of these bigger grid squares. You can see there's a bolder line here that defines a grid square. And you can divide the subdivisions by 1/2 would be 1/2 inch grid squares. 1 in 4 would be 4 grid squares. So they would be like 1/4 inch. And I'm going to use that to help me know how big my artwork is when I go back to my digitizing program. So I've deselected it accidentally. So I'm going to go back to the Paint tab, make sure Box Select is on, which it is. And if I hold Control and Shift, I can click and drag, and I'm looking for the black border line 1/2 of 3 inches. So from the center vertical line, I want 1 full grid and 1/2 a grid. See how I'm sizing that down to 1.5 grids from the center line. And when I release this, this is now 3 inches across. And if you aren't sure how big it is, you can always go to View tab, Get Length, click and drag from one side to the other. And it will show you I'm at 2.949, which is about as close to 3 inches as I'm ever going to get. So I'll just right click and finish my Get Length. And once I've got my background image set and I have it sized to the size I want, all I have to do is close that Draw and Paint program. And now I have it embedded in my digitizing, and it's ready for me to digitize. So one of the things that I think is difficult for people if they don't know how to get there is in Express Design, you tell it what you want the finished embroidery to be, and it's going to size this background image for you. But in digitizing, it's really not difficult. It's simply going to the View tab, Edit Background, and using Draw and Paint tools to get you where you need to be. Now, when I start looking at this, what order do I want to digitize this in? So if you're a beginner, you don't always know. But if you think about how something you've purchased stitches out, and you always ask questions if you're doing this for somebody else, how are you going to stitch this? Is this going to be done like an applique on wash away stabilizers so that you can just rinse off the extra stabilizer and stitch it on? Are you going to hoop up a shirt and stitch this directly on a shirt? Is it going to go on a knit? Is it going to go on a woven? Are you going to let the background fabric show through? Or are you going to put fill over the whole thing? So all of those things, and you make yourself a little list of what your target is. For this one, I wanted fill texture. So I wanted to fill over the whole area. And then I wanted in white. And then I wanted to change to a black thread color. And I made like a badge element so that ultimately what she did was hooped up stabilizer, wash away stabilizer. She die cut the applique piece, which you can do once you have applique piece in here. You can go to File and Export Applique Pieces. And then when she stitched it out, she had her shape here pre-cut. She tacked it down. She let it stitch the fill stitches in the background, and then it did the other black areas of the design. So I will step you through before we're done, the one that I finished, the final design, and show you step by step how each of those pieces stitches out. So now we have a plan. What kind of stitch types are we going to use? Well, that can be problematic for some people. I would definitely want to digitize my background area as a fill. And as I started stitching this out, what I found was if I was stitching this over, say, a denim shirt, and it was going to be a deep blue denim, if I just did one layer of white fill over the background, when it's stitched out, you know how those fill textures, sometimes the stitches separate a little bit because the needle has to penetrate them, or maybe they're a little bit of a twill type weave and those stitches just don't stay really close together. And you can see that background color peep through. So I'm going to go back over here to the already digitized logo and use my editing tools and show you this one actually has 2 layers of pattern fill. There's layer 1 and there's layer 2. And what I did that made the coverage really superb was I digitized this first layer of pattern fill, and then I went into the settings for the properties for just that piece, and I made it a higher density. So 2 is the most dense, 3 is the most common density. I made this one a 5, which is less dense, and I bumped up the underlay to a high level so that it put down a fairly thick underlay, and then it switches 90-degree angle, and it put down a fairly open fill over the top. And notice the fill angle on this one is 216. Then if and I'm going to change this to point create so you can actually see, this is the fill angle on this bottom layer of fill. Now, if I come to the second layer of pattern fill, do you see how I set this angle 90 degrees to that first one? So what it doesn't cover going in that first angle, when you come back with the second pattern fill at the second angle, it's going to cover almost 100%, even over colored fabrics in the background. So the settings for this one, if I right click and open properties, I use no underlay on the second one because I already had my underlay down there, right? But what I did was increase that density or decreased the density. I brought the stitches closer together at a density setting of 3 and gave better coverage for the top layer, which was going over the foundation layer that we'd already placed. So little tricks like this can help you get a background that gives you really good coverage. It will be a little bit stiffer, but this is a logo, right? This is a badge that we're designing, and stiffer is okay. We consider that an acceptable place to be. Now, a couple of tips that I did find from professional digitizers a while back when I was doing some research on this. One of them is that this base is your support for all the layers that go over the top of it. And if you have holes, because a lot of people like to cut holes in this fill where they're going to put letters and stuff because they feel like otherwise the letters are going to sink in. What I discovered was if I had the 2 layers at contrasting angles and I had really good coverage, I could put letters over the top and they didn't sink in. If you start cutting holes in the base, it's going to do a couple of things that are not attractive. One of those is you're going to get streaks in the stitch pattern because when it's stitching out a pattern fill at its angle that it goes back and forth and back and forth, when it comes to a hole, it has to stitch. And sometimes it'll stitch in a section and then travel around and stitch in a section and then finish it off. And when that happens, you get those streaks of almost like basting stitches where a fill pattern isn't quite complete and there's not much you can do about them. So cutting holes in the fill will break up that stitch pattern and cause flaws, and it increases those chances of the irregular streaks through that pattern fill like 100-fold. So let's go back up here and go to the next color. And all I'm doing is in the edit tab using draw previous, draw next. It's checking on the color I'm looking at and checking off the color I'm not. Now, another thing you may notice with this one, even though my artwork, so I'm going to go back here to the artwork, really is only two colors. It's black and white. And you know, when you get ready to start, you can double click on this thread color in the design panel and change it so that the first thread color is matching what you already want. But even though it was black and white, I wanted to be able to stop on any given piece or section that I had digitized when I was working this through. So how I accomplished that was to add a thread color change. I'm just going to check this one on and this one on. And you can see in the film strip, these thread color changes separate things. So this one is a satin line, and it is going to work its way around the outside of the embroidery. And if we go to properties and look at it, it is not applique. So, and honestly, I am not sure why I digitized it that way. Sometimes my logic after I've done this is escapes me. It's gone. But I'm going to go back up here and display all objects and then do next color block again a couple of times. Hopefully I'm not dragging too much, Amy, when I'm doing this. Is it working pretty good on the...
Yeah, it seems perfectly fine.
Okay, great. Great. So it just didn't like the picture of me. That's what it was. So when I look at this one, this is a satin line, and it's the border that goes around the edge of that block. And then the next color down is, if I go back to the box select so you can see where it is, and I select this group, it was the letters for locally owned. And I had a method to my madness here, because each of the sets of letters that are in this embroidery, when it's all finished, most of them are from the system fonts that come in the embroidery software. So I'm going to skip back over here to my image again for a second. And if you look at this image, you can see that this is kind of a serif font. It has the little whoop-de-doops on the ends of the line type letters. But sometimes to simplify the detail, you need to take some poetic license. So even though I typed in or brought in what it says, locally owned, I knew that I was not going to have a font that looked exactly like that. And believe it or not, I did go the route of trying to digitize those at that teeny tiny size. Now, if you take into account this whole embroidery design is only 3 inches, each one of these is maybe an 1/8 to a 1/16 inch tall. And embroidery machines, when you get up to a place where the needle, as it's swinging back and forth, like you're seeing my cursor swing back and forth, when that is so tiny, the stitches can't even properly form. And then you're going to get what looks like a crookedy running stitch in the letters. So I tried lots of different things, but what I ended up having to finally do was make my letters larger in the same space. And honestly, unless you had a printed image of the logo side by side with the finished digitized embroidery, people are not going to know. They just know that it looks like that. It says locally owned at the top, grass-fed beef, pork, and poultry underneath that, and so on and so on. So here's how you can bring in, and I don't have time to digitize this whole thing. This would be, by the time I digitized it and stitched it and changed things up that I didn't like and re-stitched it, this would be a several day process even for me. But I'm just going to do a point create, and a pattern fill and a satin line border, which I'm pretty sure is what I did. And I'm going to do preset this so that I have a satin stitch. It doesn't really matter because it's not what I'm going to use, but I'm just going to quickly use this. Well, actually, since I can do this, what I'm going to do is go in here and take this one and copy them. And I don't know how many of you knew you could even do this. And then I am going to see if it will. Nope, it didn't copy and paste them over. Dang it. That would have been a fun, easy thing to do. So I'm just going to go in here and make a quick create area and line. And I'm going to shift and click to get square points. And I'm going to bring a square point down because this is pretty much a straight line. And then I'm going to click my points around the outside. And I try to keep these points staged as close to the same location on the opposing sides as I can, because that affects the curvature of the shaping of the lines that define our stitch object. So you can see how, as you place these points, that does affect the shaping of this outside line. And when I right click and finish this, there is my pattern fill. Now I can't see through it, so I'm going to go to view and I'm going to change it to a 2D view. And now I can see through the stitches, or I can change it to an object view. And now all I see are the edges, the outlines of that piece I just created. And I'm going to insert my next color change and I'll go to black. And just remember, this is not the whole digitizing thing. What I want to show you next is how can I make lettering using the system letters. So first of all, in the home tab, you have an option to insert lettering, but you have to know which category and which particular font you want to use. And that is really hard to determine from this window because you can't see them. There's no preview of them. And then it becomes a trial and error thing. But it is very, very easy to hop over to the CREATIVATE embroidery window and go to the letter tab. And in the letter tab, you have this neat little gallery viewer, and you can go through and say, that looks pretty close to the letters I need. Or if I go up to the retro category, because I was playing with this yesterday as I was working my way down through some of these steps, and this Bernie font, that's a pretty cool one too. So I could try it. What I'm looking for is, for what I'm digitizing right here, I want just a simple block font that stitches in line stitches because they're too small for a satin stitch to be supported well. That stitch where the satin swings back and forth here is not going to be long enough for the stitches to form well. They're going to look clumpy. I won't be able to get them dense enough to really show up nicely. So I am looking for a font like that Bernie that is already digitized and already set to a fairly small size. So I know that's going to help me because my compensation, my stitch length, all that kind of stuff is already very close to what I need. So what we're going to look for is retro set Bernie 15. So let's come back over here to my window. Whoops, one more over to where I'm digitizing. And I'm going to go in the category, there's retro. And in the font, we're going to look for the Bernie, and we want the smallest Bernie size font, which is 15 to 25. To get these letters into the work area, you have to do them one at a time. So locally, space owned, but we're going to do the spacing ourselves in just a minute. So I'm going to use uppercase letters, click the L, insert it, O, insert it, C, insert it, A, and you may notice that it's bringing these in. They're down at the bottom of the screen where you can't see it, but it's bringing them in line and spaced, which is pretty cool. LOCA, we need an L and insert another L and a Y. And then I am going to select all of these and just move them up a little bit here. And I'm going to put in grown. G, R, O, W, and an uppercase N. And insert. And then I'm done, so I just cancel this out to close it. Now I have 2 lines of letters, and they are all at the same size. What I'm going to do is select them, block select them like this, and I'm going to Control Shift and reduce their size down until they are much closer in size to what I need for my logo up here at the top. So more reduction. And now I can see if I get that locally in there, the place where I want it to be, that is pretty close to the size that I think will fit nicely and stand out well and do what I want. Now, if you look over here at the film strip, you will notice each letter comes in grouped. And within each group for each individual letter, these pieces are what the digitizer used to create the letter itself. While that is all selected, I can right click over that film strip over any one of the frames and go to properties, and I can adjust stitch length from there. I could adjust the type of stitch. So those features are all available for you to change up. Now, I only have one problem, Houston, and that is grown is on the wrong line. So I just deselected them, made sure box select is still on, clicked and dragged to select the word grown, and moved it up and into alignment. And then I like to use Light View and zoom in, and voila, there we are, locally grown. Now, the other thing that if you use this technique, you will want to do is you will want to, after you create that set of letters, they will use whatever thread color they were digitized in, which can be a little bit painful, but not bad. I'm going to go into the first of the thread changes, the one for the L. When I cursor over it, the L kind of highlights in the work area. You may not be able to see it real well in that small letter, but I'm just going to double, see how the L got really bold? If I take my cursor off, you won't be able to see it, but I'm going to double click on it and change this one to a black. And then I'm just going to work my way down the film strip and select those thread color changes that I don't need. And I'm using the delete key on my computer keyboard and deleting those. And it's fast and easy. And when I get all done, I'm going to have all of these letters in one thread color change. So it just takes a few seconds to go down through there and delete them. Now you can manually digitize letters. You can create things with a like a satin stitch. And if I have a little bit of time, I'll share with you a little bit of that. But what I do want to do, I did locally grown, and then I came down, and instead of doing a dual line here, it's made to look like it's a plaque, you know, that has 3-dimensional look to it. what I did was use just a satin stitch, and I freehand digitized this with the Point Create, but there are also some shapes in there. So in the Quick Create, you could turn off the pattern fill, use satin line, and go into shapes and see if you could find a shape that was close to an element like that you could put around. You might be able to use that one and squish it down shorter on the height. So those are some ideas for getting specific shapes like that need to be symmetric. The lettering for grass-fed beef, pork, and poultry, I used, again, a traditional font, which is called block font, and there is one in there that is sized for a satin stitch that's very small. We're going to pretend that I've done the badge, I've done the letters, I've done established 1955, and come down here and look at these animals, because that was kind of an interesting piece of the puzzle. And when I looked at this, I thought, how can I digitize these animals? And you can see there's a lot of detail in this picture, and everything is a silhouette. It's not like it's a photograph that they put in here. Somebody photographed a bunch of animals and then turned them into silhouettes or something for the image. But how can I take this and give it the look I want while it is still keeping that clarity of detail? And this is what I came up with. Now, remember, when you're watching any of these Facebook Lives, how I digitize is not the same way as person X or person Z digitizes, because we all have different experiences. We all have different tools. We perceive things in different ways. But the real secret to digitizing anything is you need to think about, if I use this stitch, what is my eye going to see? Is the machine going to be able to stitch out well whatever stitch I chose? And is it going to make my eye think that it's seeing grass, it's seeing a chicken, it's seeing a cow? So what I did was I turned off the pattern fill. You just click the top part of it. I changed my satin line to a running stitch, and I create area or line. And the other thing that I like to do in something like this is digitize it continuously, which means as you're placing down these points, you want to join one object to the next. And I'll show you how to do that. So I just started somewhere under this little plant and placed a point, and I went all the way to the top and right-clicked. Now, one right click, my tools are still on. Create area or line is still on. Whenever you have a line between objects in the film strip, that means they are not connected. And so whenever there is a line, it's a bold line, it's kind of a gray or a black, it means that your embroidery machine is going to do a tie stitch, it's going to cut, it's going to jump, and it's going to do another tie stitch. And that might be, if the two pieces are not connected, that might be only 1/1000th of an inch, but it still sees it as a cut and jump. So it is going to stop, cut, tie on and off, and put thread tails on the back side. For something like this, to not make joint or to not make cut stitches in between, I need to cursor over. Can you see that, guys? That little slash mark? When I cursor over that little bow tie, when my cursor goes from the dot, or if I'm holding shift, it goes from a square to a slash, that means that first point I click is now joined to the piece I just laid down. And I can come back down here, and I'm going to stop about right there. I'm going to shift and click a square point. Right click to make the stitches, but leave the tool on. And if you look at my film strip, look at this. My stitch lines do not have a black line in between them. These two do, because This triple stitch is part of a letter, and I'm actually going to sneak up here, right click and insert a color change so I can separate these. And that is the reason why you saw in my film strip, I had all those color changes because I kept things separated. So when I went back and got ready to make edits and changes, it was much easier to find things in the film strip. So now I'm going to come back, make sure I'm on that last frame in the film strip. My tool is still on for create area of line. I want to connect this again, so I'm going to cursor over until I see the slash, hold my shift key and click. So now my pieces are joined. Come back down here a little ways, shift and click for a square point, right click to finish it, cursor over, and all digitizing logos is, for the most part, is deciding what you want to do and then repeat it again and again and again. And Amy's laughing, but it's true. I mean, that's really what it is. So I'm going to cursor over here to make sure I'm connecting. I'm going to hold the shift to get a sharp end. I'm going to work my way back down over the running stitch I just added. Right click, cursor over, click another point, right click. And I broke it up in small segments like this for the simple reason that it was much easier to go back and edit things. Got to my chicken. What do I need to do to my chicken? Well, I need a pattern fill. And actually, all I did was pattern fill, but I'm going to come back to the finished one so that I can show you. And I'm going to get to the point where we see the chicken. There's grass fed. You can see the sequence this way too. Do you guys see how that stitch sequence is breaking out? So maybe if I hide the picture a little bit, it will make it easier for you to see the stitches. And there are the animals. And when I got to this chicken, this is digitized continuously, but it's made up of all kinds of different stitch objects. So there's triple stitches, there's running stitches. I used some double with zigzag to make things a little plumper where I had like a seed head or something. The chicken is actually done in 2 steps like I did the badge. So the first one is a high underlay and not very dense. And then the second one is no underlay and a lower number in the density. So it is very dense, but between these two, if I go to my point edit, the stitch angle is rotated at 90 degrees from one to the other. And that gave me a nice small object, but still had the clarity that I needed to be able to say, oh, cool, that's a chicken. And because the ends of the fill, when they run at angles like that, kind of poke out in little areas, it actually gave the illusion of feathers on this little tiny chicken, who's probably actually only about a ½ inch tall in the finished embroidery, to hair on my cow, to rough skin on my little piggy pig. Now, when I got down to that point, and I'm going to come back over and show you a little bit more here, I'm just going to join this, and then I'm going to skip over like I've done my chicken, cow, and pig, and come to the other end. So I've done all the pieces in between, and I'm going to hold shift and click a point, just so I'm at the bottom of my satin stitch. And this time I'm going to use a different tool. So for this one, I knew that we had this cool feathered satin, and it's something we don't use really super often, but the feathered satin turned out to be a really nice tool for creating the look of grass. And when I went to the feathered satin and selected it, and then went to the column tool settings and chose feathered satin to preset, I adjust the density so it's a little more dense, but you can change that up later. And then I'm going to start down here as side A and up here as side B. So I want side B to be the feathered side. If I chose both sides would feather. If I chose A, the side I start on first would feather. If I choose B, the side I place the second point will feather. So now I'm going to join this. So again, I want to cursor over and make sure I see that little slash. However, if you screw up, which can happen, I'm just going to make a little segment here just to show you. If I screw up and I can see that this is not joined, all I have to do is select one of the two objects. I'm going to select the one above, and I can drag this point. Oops, I've got my tool still on. Sorry, guys. I can go to point edit, select this feathered satin, and I can choose, if I zoom in enough, its start point, and I can connect it, or I can use a really cool tool, and that one is in Point Create, and it's called a single stitch. And single stitch is great for the first point in the previous object will automatically select itself. All you have to do is cursor over the second point until you see my slash, and my slash is not coming up. Of course, it won't on computer when I want it to. And click over that. And then if I did it really good, look at that. I got rid of the slash in between the two. I've just joined those two objects together. And so I can repair little things that were not quite done the way I needed them to be. I know why I can't see it, because I have this on 2D view instead of 3D view. All right. So when you get into the heat of designing things, it's easy to forget where you're at. I'm going to come back here and take this feathered satin out and the single stitch I just made. And I'm going back into my Point Create tools and create area or line, and make sure you're on the last frame in the film strip or it'll put it in the wrong place. And then I'm going to cursor over. There's my slash. I've got this set for, oops, and I set this for the wrong tools. I want to go to the feathered satin, cursor over to get the slash, and I'm going to work angles. Now this is really kind of fun. I'm going to hold the shift key down when I do these so I get square corners. Do you see when I cursor over that, it lets me adjust it? So shift and click turns that into a square. So I'm going to place points, but I'm going to kind of do this so the top is going back and forth at different angles. And you can't talk really fast when you're doing this because your brain can't keep up with your hand. But what I want you to see is how you can manipulate these areas of satin. So there's A, there's B. This is the last one I place. I need to come back over to this side because if I don't go A, B, A, B, A, B, it will twist those stitches, which can be a cool effect, but not what you're looking for right here. And I'm just going to make this part of the way across so you guys can see it. And then I probably am going to cover a few things here and then ask if there are any extra questions. But this is so cool because look how that has taken those feathered satin stitches and made them look like they are grass. So I'm going to go to live view and zoom in on this so you can see that this actually simulates that look and feel of grass. And in the final stitch out, it was really just exactly what I targeted. So I was very, very happy about that. So when you get everything all digitized, I'm going to come back here and show everything and zoom to fit. When you get everything all digitized, the next thing every good digitizer does is exports this or sends it to your embroidery machine and do a test stitch. And do the test stitch using, if they're going to stitch it on t-shirts with X kind of stabilizer, you want to do your test stitch the same. I suggest using the finest embroidery needle, and by fine I mean size, smallest size embroidery needle because embroidery needles have large eyes that you can use without shredding your thread because you're doing a lot of really fine, small, precise stitches. I also suggest stiffening the fabrics. So when I did my little test stitch, I stiffened it with a spritz-on iron dry type of embroidery stabilizer. I have the best luck with it on both wovens and knits, but everybody has their own type of stuff they like to use. I balance, I may not care what the back looks like. The stitches, especially the small satin stitches, are going to come out better if that tension is fairly close to being balanced. So I ended up on the machine I was stitching on going one full number tighter on the top tension to get that balance I was looking for. But then you need to use the same thread in the needle and the bobbin. And I'm not talking about using black embroidery thread in the top and black pre-wound bobbin in the bottom, because those threads may be slightly different weights and flexes, stiffer or softer. Use the same thread from the same spool in your top and your bobbin and slow down your machine. Then after you've stitched it out, you look at the things that work, you look at the things that didn't work, you go back and open your EDO file again. And that's why we do a save as, give it a file name, and save this as an EDO file from Digitizing. Open it up. You can go down your film strip. That's where having these, each segment of the design broken up by these different black thread color changes is nice, because you can work your way down through there and say, oops, this pattern fill wasn't perfect. I can select just that piece and that thread color change and edit. And the last thing I want to leave you with is keeping your perspective. Ask a friend to look at the stitch out. Almost always the friend will say, oh, that's fabulous, when you're saying, oh, but this is wrong and that is wrong and that is not the way I wanted it at all. Remember, embroidery is all about perception, and it's about tricking the eye. So when you're digitizing a logo, you're not looking to duplicate every single detail in the piece of artwork you're started with. You are looking to trick the eye into seeing what you wanted to see. One other tip that I think is helpful, when you're working with very small letters of satin stitch, so like the Byhalia, Mississippi, that one, sometimes I will actually do that same trick of copying and pasting them and making one layer be very, the density number high, so they're not very dense, and the top layer being more dense. But almost always smaller satin stitches need to be compensated. So if you look at a satin stitch, let me see if I can find a satin stitch here, and I can show you in the properties compensation. You almost always need to bump that compensation up so that as these stitch across, the software is making this wider to allow for the fact that the stitches tend to want to pull in. 10 to 15 are good beginning settings if you find your satin's coming out too skinny and you need to bump the compensation. And density, I probably on satin stitches like that would start with a density of 4 or 5, which is much higher than people would think. But do be willing to do test stitches and rework the design. Most of any kind of advanced digitizing like this is going to be trial and error, learning from the things you try that don't work. They're not mistakes. They just didn't work out the way you planned. Okay, any specific comments or questions, Amy?
I don't have any questions, just people saying that they're going to rewatch this and study it in more depth. So great information, Janie.
Okay, well, I want to thank them all for coming today. And next week, we're going to do the same lesson, although it probably will be slightly different every time we go through it. And we're going to do it showing the tools and the toolbars from the Mac.